Dennis Lemma was elected as Seminole County's 10th sheriff and was re-elected for a second term in 2020. As the county's chief law enforcement officer, he leads a workforce of more than 1,400 employees and manages a $170 million budget. Over the course of 30 years, he's worked in virtually every position within the agency, serving as the Sheriff's Office primary spokesperson and receiving promotions from the ranks of Sergeant, Lieutenant, Captain, Major, and Chief Deputy prior to becoming Sheriff. He's dedicated his efforts to reduce the impact of opioid addiction in our community, and in January of 2019 was named to the Transition Advisory Committee Working Group on Opioid Abuse. He also serves as chair of the First Lady Casey DeSantis' Drug Abuse and Prevention Panel. In June of 2020, he was elected to the Major County Sheriffs of America Executive Board, and in February of 2020, he was sworn in as its president. The Major County Sheriffs of America is a professional law enforcement association of the largest elected sheriff's offices, dedicated to preserving the highest integrity in law enforcement. In July of 2020, he was nominated to serve as vice chair on the executive board of the Florida Sheriff's Association. He's a Marine Corps veteran, a graduate of the FBI Academy, and holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a master's degree in administrative leadership. We've asked him here today to address several really big important issues and any other topics that he'd like to address as well. But he's going to provide us with an overview of the Sheriff's Department in Seminole County, its place in the county governance, and how it coordinates with the city police departments. He's going to share some of the recent crime statistics and trends. He's going to talk to us about how risk protection orders are being implemented in our county and its use, looking at community violence intervention programs, the potential impacts if such a thing as permitless carry was ever enacted by our state legislature, and he's also going to share with us how his department coordinates with the school department, the school board, to ensure the safety of our children in school and also to promote a safe awareness of gun ownership to the parents of those students. So we've given him quite a long laundry list, which he says he's already cataloged how he's going to address, but I will turn it all over to him. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for educating voters on such important topics. And I think that when you listen to the list, I could spend hours on any one of those topics. So please excuse my brevity as I try to kind of hit on all of those topics and a couple of other things that I feel are incredibly important to our community and probably to each of you. Starting first, you'll find that what we do is we dig in to underlying conditions that lead people down the path to commit crime in the first place. We are absolutely convinced that crime in our community is a symptom of another problem. And towards the top of that list typically is substance use disorder, mental health, poor parenting, because little boys and girls have no choice who their mommies and daddies are, and some are given an unfair shot at life from the moment that they're born. So you'll find that we as an organization invest an incredible amount of resources to prevent people from ever entering into the criminal justice system. Or what I like to remind people, that the most significant thing that we can do about crime is to prevent it from occurring in the first place. Or it's crime prevention's job to keep enforcement out of business, right? That means if people get healthy, they get off the substance, they get the mental health counseling and support that they need, they can live a relatively normal lifestyle. The strategies and partnerships that we have put in place here in Seminole County have received now national attention. When I say national attention, quite literally, I will go to various meetings and brief the U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and he knows. I know the Seminole County model, I know the programs. The Department of Justice wants to invest in initiatives like this. Advent Health with the Hope and Healing Center has been a signature partner to allow people to be diverted from the criminal justice system because they suffer a substance use disorder. And we now know the story of Big Pharma with overprescribing of OxyContin, and a lot of families and a lot of individuals have been thrusted down the path of dependency because they were simply following the doctor's orders. And when they can no longer get the pills, when society said, you know what, overprescribing and taking OxyContin every day is bad for you, they turned to street-level heroin and all of the other hazards and unprecedented devastation and death that go along with it. So it's something that you'll see that we're incredibly passionate about. To expand that relationship, I worked with our Board of County Commissioners and our city mayors and managers and chiefs of police to ask for $9 million of the American Rescue Relief Funds to start a expanded relationship with Advent Health that addresses mental health disorder like we've never done before. And I'm proud to say that through a partnership with Advent Health and Walmart and the support of the Florida legislature and Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, we're able to kind of put together this package that addresses not only dependency on substances, but now in the first quarter of next year, we will have a new mental health facility in Altamont Springs where nobody is turned away, regardless of your level of healthcare coverage. Uninsured, underinsured population, warm handoff, connecting the dots between substance use disorder, and it is, again, a national model. I was just in Tampa yesterday presenting to the State Mental Health Board and Commission on the programs, initiatives, and partnerships that we have. Again, all connecting the dots that crime is a symptom of another problem, and if we can invest on people before they commit crime, we make the greatest difference in our community. We do that in harmony with all of our city agencies. One of the unique things about the Office of Sheriff is there's 4 general responsibilities. You talk about the internal working of the sheriff. The sheriff is responsible to be the chief law enforcement officer of the county, the chief correctional officer of the county, and that's a relationship that we take very seriously because we feel like we can change somebody's life during the time that they're incarcerated. As sheriff, I think it is a general expectation of our citizens that say, Sheriff, if you apprehend somebody and incarcerate them for breaking into my car, before they're released, please give them the help that is necessary so they don't do the same exact thing that they did before they got incarcerated. And this is why you'll see us investing in programs and initiatives and trying to rehabilitate and habilitate as much as we can. Now, you probably heard the word rehabilitation because you guys are involved with campaigns and elections, but you have probably not heard the word habilitation much in the criminal justice space. I would argue that rehabilitation in the pure sense means make what it once was. But for some families, some people who are incarcerated, they were never right in the first place. And I can say this through experiences. I've executed search warrants and I've had 5-year-olds tug me in my pant leg as I wore a full uniform and say to me, check me to see if I have any warrants for my arrest, as we take care of their caregiver, their guardian, in handcuffs. What opportunity has that child had to live a meaningful, structured life? So what the folks that work in our Department of Corrections do is they rehabilitate and habilitate through programs. Like, we were the first correctional facility in the country to offer all 3 forms of FDA-approved medical-assisted treatment therapy for opioid use disorder, combined with cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, if we can make people healthy by the time they come out, if we can persuade them away from a life of crime, it not only makes our community safer, but it allows those individuals to have a more sustainable life without having to be raised on our tax dollars. Or, we know an alarming statistic that if you are the son or daughter of somebody who is incarcerated or addicted to a substance, you are 8 times more likely to engage in maladaptive behavior yourself. Or children of people who are in custody ultimately become disproportionately people who live a lifestyle of crime unless you break that cycle. And that's what we're trying to do with a more holistic and sophisticated approach. We do this all while taking the most dangerous people in our society and make sure that they're held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. We have some, what we call in general terms, bad people out there that victimize and hurt others. Even on the inside of the correctional facility, they do that, and we make sure that we're keeping them away from any person that they potentially can do harm to, both inside and outside. But the second area of responsibility I have as sheriff is to be the chief correctional officer of the county. The third area of responsibility is the chief administrative and executive officer of the circuit and county courts. That's a mouthful. What does that mean? That means the sheriff is charged with providing security to the entire judiciary. That every judge, every courtroom, every court complex, the sheriff is tasked with providing safety in those proceedings. In addition to that, I have to take care of all of the civil responsibilities that is ordered by the court. Child support, alimony, eviction, risk protection orders, which we'll talk about as my presentation goes on. All of that is ordered by the courts to the sheriff to carry out and execute that. That's the third area of responsibility. The fourth, and probably to speak to the point of our collaboration, the sheriff is the conservator of the peace. Now there's a couple of other sentences that go along with that constitutional responsibility, but to conserve the peace means it does not matter the jurisdiction. We have great chemistry, great relationships with all of our municipalities, 7 cities and 8 police departments, the 8th police department being the airport police department. We agree, we work together, we collaborate, we have similar interests and ideas and views, but in the event that a city ever said, and again, would never happen in Seminole County, but it happened in neighboring counties, if there was a police department that ever said, we can't afford to provide policing services, or we don't want to provide policing services, or we want to allow for total lawlessness to occur in a particular area, it would be the sheriff's responsibility to take over primary public safety responsibilities within those areas. Again, never an issue here in Seminole County, but the Constitution clearly outlines that. Great chemistry, great work going on. There's a report card. One of the things on the list was crime rate, crime trends. And the crime rate, crime trend has been incredibly difficult to track recently because we're coming out of 2 COVID years, where COVID years where businesses were closed down, people weren't out and about, which sometimes gave the illusion that there was less crime going on in a particular area, right? Like you think about if all of the bars and nightclubs and locations where people are engaged in use of alcohol and all that, if all of those places are closed, you are going to have less problems that are alcohol or substance induced than if you would normally do. One of the most alarming things is the amount of child abuse, neglect, or abandonment that has been occurring, but yet be unreported when kids are not in school. So a lot of the child abuse reports have come into our office that we're one of 7 counties in the state of Florida that has taken exclusive responsibility for abuse, neglect, and abandonment of all children, right? Only 7. We've done it now for 20 years. But when school closed down, the reports of abuse diminished. When I think all of us in this room know that if you were the victim at the hands of a caregiver when you went to school, where other people could notice signs of abuse or neglect, and your family lost their job, was in a financial heartache, stress about losing loved ones that they could not see, the amount of victimization has only increased, but the reports decreased during those 2 years where people were not exposed as much as they were. So we're cleaning up the unintended consequences of COVID, which has created a mental health crisis like we've never experienced before. The most recent stat shows that children have seriously contemplated suicide at 25% in the past 2 years. 1 out of every 4 children has seriously thought about suicide in the past couple of years. Additionally, and one of the things that's not being discussed enough is if you were a 16-year-old or 15-year-old on the onset of COVID, and you are now 18 or 19 years old, you missed 2.5 years of critical years when it comes to one's cognitive development. Meaning that between ages 16 to 18, as parents and grandparents, we know that a lot of growing up occurs in there. This is when we look at our kids and say, you know, a little boy or a little girl who doesn't even have a learner's permit to drive is now going off to the university by themselves, enlisting in the military, entering the workforce, and they missed experiences during that 2 years that are just normal in our development. Like when a spouse or a relationship breaks up in the middle of the lunchroom and it is hurtful to the child, but the child can come home and say, Mom, Dad, loved one, my boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever it is, broke up with me in the cafeteria in front of others, where we can comfort them and say, it will get better. As you grow up, you're going to experience some of these things, and we work with them to get through that. The first time that the popular kids don't accept them at the table and they come home depressed about it, we're there to say, hey, it'll get better, cheer up. If they miss that for 2 years, and the first time that they're experiencing that is at the university or somewhere else, you can imagine that there's no one necessarily there to comfort them. And when you look at this trend of active shooters and active killers, you'll see that these people who are shooting up locations are 18, 19, 20. It begs the question, what have they been doing for the last 2 or 3 years? Have they been sitting in front of a computer, becoming more and more radicalized? Has there been a missed opportunity for somebody on the outside that may have seen behavior that is bizarre or uncharacteristic and call home and say, hey, we need to have a parent-teacher conference because there's some activities and comments that we're noticing that probably need to be addressed, right? Look, I don't proclaim to know that there's a direct correlation, but I'm making an observation that we're trying to clean up a social mental health crisis like we've never seen before. So this is what goes on. Let me shift to our schools. Now, I'm very proud of the relationship we have with Seminole County Public School System. And I think it's important to highlight the uniqueness about the relationship that we have. It was 5 years ago, even with my predecessor, when I was his chief deputy, Sheriff Don Esslinger, where we came together, he came together and said with Walt Griffin that, you know what, we need to be on the forefront of providing a safe and secure campus, and we feel what works best for us is a dedicated, professionally trained policing professional on every single public school campus in Seminole County. And that's, again, 69 campuses or so in the school system, and the 5 charter schools all have a professionally trained, dedicated law enforcement officer on that campus. They're there, and the high school campuses have anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on the size of the campus. And we said, you know what, they should be there not only for safety and security and have a passion to serve kids. We should also build academic curriculums where they actually engage in meaningful, productive dialogue with the students, faculty, and staff of what goes on. And I know that there's been big conversation about guardian programs and teachers with firearms and all that. And we have doubled down both with our previous sheriff and previous superintendent, and both with me and Sarita, and said the model that works best for us is leaving that responsibility with a dedicated, professionally trained police officer or deputy sheriff to provide, again, much more service than just being honest, right? And it's not my job to judge what happens in other jurisdictions. That this is not an indictment on what works for other areas. What I'm saying, what works for us is this model, this strategy, and it's one that we're incredibly proud of. In addition to that, we took it one step further and said the school safety and director in Seminole County is a sheriff's office captain, which is the only school district in the entire state of Florida. It is the only county in the entire state of Florida that has the director of school safety and security that is directly embedded with the school superintendent, is a dedicated member of the Seminole County Sheriff's Office executive staff. So that expedites the process and return on anything that goes on. And of course, we have all types of technology that's working within that space. So very proud of the relationship. Anytime that there is a threat of behavioral assessment, We have a dedicated, professionally trained team in our domestic security division that will take those threats, that will like, let's say there's a child that writes something on a school mirror in the bathroom, or writes something on the wall, or there's a tweet or a text or something goes on. Our domestic security team starts working around the clock at that time, backtracking, using technology resources, visiting students' homes, doing voluntarily searching of areas once we receive consent from the parents or guardians, and connecting the dots, because we know how incredibly important school safety and awareness is, not only now, always, but we are very mindful of situations that go wrong. We also train our school resource deputies to immediately engage in the threat when the threat's on campus. What does that mean? That means don't wait, immediately go to wherever the challenge is and engage that threat and send the resources back to preserve that. And it sounds absolutely horrifying to even think that we have to have conversations about that, but we absolutely have to have conversations about that. And our school resource deputies and officers engage in that and understand the importance of it. We also work with our school board, and we've just recently released gun safety strategies and awareness to prevent people from law-abiding gun owners to having their guns get in the wrong hands. And we have seen examples of people who have not properly abided by Florida state statute and properly secured their firearms. And for decades now, the Seminole County Sheriff's Office has partnered with a variety of resources to offer crime prevention and safety awareness, to include gun safety, and also free gun locks to any family member, any person who does not have a gun safety lock. We at the Sheriff's Office provide those free of charge. And I think that through recent conversations with the superintendent, additional resources will be linked from the school resource webpage on how they can see not only gun safety awareness, totality safety awareness, which is included with gun safety, and also how they can click on a link and receive a free gun lock should they choose. In that area, we're also reminding people of what Florida state statute says about proper, secure and handling of firearms. So again, it's things that we're always mindful of. Not anything new, by the way. These are things that we've been doing for decades, and these services we provide for decades, but you just hear less about them unless you're in search of that. So we're pushing that forward. On the list was a better understanding of risk protection orders, and this is where typically the conversation gets like back and forth, where people have strong views on risk protection orders and things that go on. So kind of a recap of what risk protection orders are and what we do in that regard. Not only what we do, what all counties across the state, at least the ones that I'm aware of, do, is about 4 years ago, the Florida legislature passed the law that allows policing professionals to apply for and receive what's called a risk protection order. Some people call these red flag laws. They call them a variety of things, but the technical term for them is risk protection orders. And what this does is it allows a policing professional, a law enforcement officer, to respond to a call for service. Typically, these are calls for service where somebody has been involved in a criminal activity involving a weapon. It's typically a response where somebody is in a mental health crisis, and there is a reasonable belief that they pose an imminent threat to themselves or other people within the area. When these situations occur, the law has allowed for the policing professional to apply for and receive what's called a risk protection order. A risk protection order has two main phases in the order. There is a temporary risk protection order, which allows for the surrendering of firearms or receiving of firearms. I say surrendering of firearms first, because in 99% of the cases, the people who are applying for and receiving risk protection orders, the people voluntarily say, I'll give my firearms to somebody else that's not immediately in the family, or I will voluntarily turn the firearms over for safekeeping, because most people who are in crisis actually want help. They want services. So a risk protection order would be applied for by the police officer or deputy sheriff. That is then reviewed by their supervisor to make sure that the criteria is met for further review and consideration, and that goes to a crime analyst either in the agency, a city agency, or the sheriff's office. The crime analyst will look back on past documented mental health conditions, past criminal history, to create an assessment on what that person's past looks like. And that is then taken over and evaluated by our general counsel at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. We do risk protection order submittals on behalf of all city agencies in Seminole County. Every city agency does not have their own dedicated legal staff. Most have legal staff, but it's more city legal staff, and our legal staff is unique to criminal justice matters. So when it comes in, our attorneys review it. What does it say? A temporary risk protection order is for a window of 14 days. That says the person would surrender their firearms or take firearms for self-keeping for a window of 14 days. During that 14 days, and typically within 24, 48 hours, a court then reviews the circumstance of that case. What do I mean by a court? A judge will look at it, and judge will say, yes, the temporary protection order has been granted, and within the 14 days, that's when a permanent injunction order can be issued. Injunction orders last for 1 year, and if you are the recipient of an injunction order, you have one opportunity to appeal to the court if you want to be reheard on your case of access to firearms. And an ultimate decision is made for that 1 year window. Why are these used? Because I think that you only have to watch the news for a while to know that people who are in crisis are a danger to themselves, a danger to the general public, and a danger to their family. Like the amount in my 30-year career of horrific murder-suicide situations is just incredibly alarming. There is a lot of debate on the topic of weapons, firearms, and what's the right thing to do. Since 4 years ago, we have done a little over 200 risk protection orders as a county, not just as the sheriff's office, but as a county as a whole. All of the city agencies, we've done maybe 200 over the past 4 years. And out of the 200 that were applied for, we've done in the neighborhood of 135 or 140 that actually have moved forward with that. Again, the most dangerous people that we have determined and the courts have determined when it comes to that. So that's where we're at with risk protection orders, and I'll give you the opportunity at the end to ask me any questions. How long have I gone? Hypothetical situations that have not occurred or will occur. I will say it's my job as sheriff. I raise a hand, take an oath to uphold the Constitution, the laws of the state of Florida, and I will absolutely do that. It's not my job as sheriff to create law. So there's a lot of concern about what would constitutional carry look like here in the state of Florida. Does constitutional carry mean open carry? What are these opinions? I will say that for our sheriff's office, establishing policies, you'll see me in plain clothes. You'll see the staff members that I have with me, both my undersheriff and my chief of staff, where you'll see no visible firearms on us. Now, I will tell you that does not mean we're not armed. We know that if I take this off and I take this pin off, and you can't see my firearm on me, it puts me at a tactical advantage, right? If I was in here and I just had a gun out in view, so recognizing that internally in our office, we said, if you're in the sheriff's office, you're working in plain clothes, you're not clearly identified and marked, you will cover up your firearm because I don't want people to see our deputies and say, well, there's a threat. He doesn't even know, or she doesn't even know I'm here, and now I'm going to do something or wait for the. I just think it's better for us not to be visible with that. We come in just like this, where I'm at. That's the stand that I have taken internally. If there is a bill that is moved forward for constitutional carry, if there is whatever it is, we would clearly evaluate the bill, not only individually as sheriffs, but policing professionals from across the state, probably partner with our associations and determine whether or not we want to take a stance for or against a particular bill. We don't do that on every single bill that comes down. But bills that we feel like present a public safety threat, we feel like we opine opinions. We can't influence what the lawmakers are ultimately going to decide, but I think that our opinion absolutely matters. So what we will do is we will be mindful. We will look at what bills are presented, what language they have, but I find that a lot of times there's speculation, there's talk, and there's no bill that's ever passed. There's nothing that comes across the table. I will tell you this. We will leverage every aspect of our political capital to ensure that our community remains safe, regardless of what that means. And again, I go to these things and people want to tie me down and say, what would you do if? What would you do if? I'm just simply not going to get cornered into hypothetical talks and discussion. And some people are absolutely frustrated that I won't do it, but it is a mindful position to take. Give me a bill, let me look at it, I'll review it, and then I'll offer an opinion on what's going on and what's happening with that. When we shift back to crime, because we talked about social services, we talked about mental health, we talked about substance use disorder, but when we come to crime tracking, the fundamentals always have to be met, right? The most complained about problem in a community is always traffic. The most prevalent crime in our community that is least documented is thefts or burglaries or property-related things. So we are tracking, if you compare where we're at today to 2019, and we go to 2019 because 2019 is probably the last year that has not been negatively affected by COVID, with businesses closed down and et cetera. We are tracking from 2019 to now a 35% reduction in crime. Think about that, 35% reduction in crime. And people are typically absolutely amazed when I tell them this, that the volume of crime in 1980 was higher than the volume of crime this year. And when I say volume, I'm talking about the raw number of reported criminal incidents to police. And people typically are like, Sheriff, how can that be? I mean, I moved here in the mid-70s and I lived here in 1980, and I don't feel any safer now than what I did back then. Why is that? Well, the reason why is in 1980, you had to know the sheriff themselves in order to actually find out what was going on. And we simply were not as transparent as we are now. But if something happened in this restaurant right now, I promise you in 15 minutes, 2, 6, 9, 35, 13 DBO, a whole group of people who are not even like credentialed media sources will say, hey, I'm with so-and-so blog or whatever, and potentially somebody in this room will pick up their camera and take a couple of videos and say, you won't believe what's going on inside this restaurant in Longwood, right? We are open, we are transparent, we want our citizens to know what's going on, what's happening, what we can do, and where we can go. What was the next topic?
The community violence intervention program, what
Yeah.
we do, what we're doing.
So community violence intervention program. What I think that means is a threat assessment, looking at a more intelligent way to properly police in the interest of providing safety. Now again, I could spend the rest of my time pounding on my chest, bragging on the numbers that between 2019 and now, 35% reduction, or what I like to say a lot, there's never been as significant of a reduction over a 5-year window than there has been in the past 5 years, in spite of a closed economy, right? We're doing great things. And that's just not the sheriff's office, that's just not the police departments, that's our combination and partnership with law-abiding people. who feel like it's their responsibility to pick up the phone and call and say, I see something and I've been told to say something, and it may be absolutely nothing, but you may want to take a look at this, right? Report anything that goes on. This concept of community policing that incorporates intelligence-led policing does unique things. That we know that about 62% of the crime that occurs in our community is reserved to a 10% suspect type. These are people who wake up in the morning and their lifestyle is to engage in criminal activity. Meaning that the person who steals a car, the person who buys drugs, the person who is illegally carrying a firearm, the person who victimizes their spouse, is very likely to be the one that you stop on a traffic stop with a bunch of stolen property or a dead body in the back of the car. They live a lifestyle of crime. It's not like balance. It's not like they've got a legitimate job and they're committing one crime. I mean, they have no legitimate work, right? This percentage of the people, small percentage of people, responsible for a large percentage of the crime. And unfortunately, the policing strategy across the country has prioritized people based upon what they're wanted for at a particular time. Meaning that this term of recidivism, and to clearly explain to this group what recidivism means from our perspective, is when you see somebody's face on television and the reporter says, we're looking for John or Jane Doe who's wanted for murder, they're 22 years old, they've been arrested 19 times, and they've been in prison twice, you leave that scratching your head and saying, how can somebody at 22 years old have been arrested 19 times, have gone to prison twice, because you can't go to prison until you're 18, gone to prison twice, and is now wanted for murder? So what we've done is we've seen people as well as locations and have given additional attention to those particular people. One, you'll never hear me refer to our responsibility on the inside of our county correctional facility as jail. Jail to me represents brick and mortar that holds people in, when correctional facility represents the behavior that should be demonstrated on the inside to minimize one likelihood to re-victimize when they get out. And this is why you'll see us investing in that when we arrest John Doe for jaywalking. We don't arrest people for that, but just as an example, a minor type of crime, that we arrest this person for jaywalking, we don't treat them as their only charge is the misdemeanor that they've been arrested for. We treat them in totality of their past record to offer some services. Sometimes it's faith-based organizations. Sometimes it's other nonprofit organizations. And we make true with what is called a warm handoff upon their release. Like, we don't want to release people back into the same environment that they just left in, increasing their likelihood to do the exact same thing and go back in. While at the same time, when appropriate, we want to expand problem-solving courts, right? Drug court, veterans court, mental health court, all of these problem-solving courts that have shown to be incredibly effective when it comes to stabilizing people and getting them to move down the right path. It does not work for everybody. Some people are committing crime because it's a business for them. Some people say, well, you know what? If I make $200,000 in the first 6 months and I get arrested and caught and I go to jail for a year, it's still better than if I was making $30,000 working a job. So they do that. And again, we want to work with our judges, in our judiciary, in our state attorney, to make sure that people are not capitalizing on those things. Lastly, when it comes to threat assessment and awareness, our Captain Ron Hopper, who has joined us and is running as lead on our domestic security division, was the lead FBI agent in charge of the Orlando district during the Pulse nightclub shooting. And he was retiring from the FBI. We wanted to take and expand our partnership with the FBI, our federal partners, to make sure that we're tapping into threat and risk assessments. So one of those areas was to hire in Ron Hopper to work in that capacity of our domestic security division. There's also a central district of the state of Florida that goes all the way from Volusia County all the way down to Martin County, called CFIX, Central Florida Intelligence Exchange. And this is analysts, public and private sector, people coming together to look at threat assessments as it moves from one jurisdiction to another. I am the chair of that commission. So we meet monthly to look at threats, to share information, intelligence that may be occurring in Polk County, Osceola County, Martin County, St. Lucie County, and how it plays in to our total risk assessment, because we understand, being a tourist destination, one of the most recognizable tourist destinations in the world, it is incredibly important that the good guys and gals are sharing information and intelligence as much as the people who are victimizing. They're meeting on street corners, state prisons, federal prisons, and local correctional facilities. It is incredibly important that the law protectors and the public and private partners are doing that as well. And that's what we do to Central Florida Intelligence Exchange. And then we have people assigned to federal task forces. Like, we have multiple people assigned to the FBI. They're Seminole County Sheriff's deputies, but they are collaterally working for the FBI. They're working for the U.S. Marshals. They're working for the Secret Service. So you'd be surprised to find that your local folks here are going on those raids, participating in those operations under the federal authority umbrella. And again, we're so blessed to have direct relationships with all of these folks. Like when we talk about things, I can get on the phone and have conversations with the leaders of these federal agencies about expanded partnership and work that we're doing here. So that's what we're doing with threat assessment. I have to be mindful of not getting too much in the weeds, because some of that, again, remains classified, because myself and other members of our executive team have various FBI clearances, from secret to top secret clearance, where we get briefs on what's going on, what's happening. And it's so unique, because when you're briefed, you literally go on what's called a skiff. And I've been on the skiff at the Hoover building at FBI headquarters, and as well as our skiff here at our local FBI office. And you're not allowed to bring any paper, any pencil, any electronic device. You got to put your phone in, and then you go in there. It's that significant, and a lot of it is only verbal of what you do. So with that, I know we're rushed on time. A lot of different topics. I could dig in for hours on any one of these topics, but I think what's important is to give you the opportunity to ask me some questions, provide some feedback. What you'll find here with our office and our members is we try not to sensationalize what we do, right? We are truly invested in the health and well-being of our citizens and our community. We just left on the way here, literally just left a meeting with Advent Health and Walmart about this expanded mental health partnership of this new facility that we're going to open in Altamont Springs. A lot of people would say, well, I never imagined a sheriff kind of weighing in on these health and human services and these youth programs. We run our own juvenile detention center. We're the only county in the state of Florida that runs our own juvenile detention center, because we want to be mindful of habilitating and rehabilitating within those areas. We are the only county in the state that runs juvenile or adult county probation officers, based on our relationship with our great board of county commissioners. Run that. The school effort that I talked about is because we have a partnership with our school board members, our elected school board members, our county commission, where we go half and half on the funding and resources of that school safety and awareness program. I'm telling you, there's a lot to be proud of as we work in a very challenging and divided time. And what feels really good for me as sheriff is to be part of efforts that have garnered bipartisan support, like this Hope and Healing Center, this stuff that I talked about with Advent Health. You know, we've gotten $1.2 million of appropriations from largely a Republican-led legislature, but at the same time, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy gives us a $400,000 appropriation and has arranged for me to brief Congressmember Bass and the Congressional Black Caucus on supporting of the effort. And what feels like an incredibly divided world, it feels good to really come together with people and say, okay, this is truly working together to do something significant. So with that, I'll pause.
I'm gonna take my prerogative here in protecting the citizens and especially the children in our community. I was floored by that 1 in 4 statistics about children contemplating suicide. And when there is access to a gun, that contemplation and attempt becomes deadly more often than not. So I would like to hear from your perspective as a law enforcement officer, what is the definition of responsible gun ownership? Because I'd like to be able to take that definition to our legislature and say, this is the kind of legislation we need to ensure, because leaving it up to the individual gun owner to be responsible without there being some consequence for irresponsibility is kind of, what we've been doing.
Yeah.
So explain to me what responsible gun ownership would look like, and that what we could do to bolster the effectiveness.
So responsible gun ownership starts, I would say, with what the law says, and what appears to be irresponsible gun ownership. And sometimes the laymen say there's no consequence. Well, that's not true. I mean, we've charged people with not properly securing firearms when kids have gotten access to firearms, but that's not what leads the story, right? The tragic events and activities. So the law has been pretty clear what responsible gun ownership is, that the gun owner is liable criminally should they not properly secure and allow their firearms to get in the arms and access to kids, right? So the law's there. We and other agencies charge people for when that occurs, but when that charge occurs, that's not what leads to headlines. What leads to headlines is the devastation effect of suicide and other types of crimes that may occur from that. I think additionally, it is a constitutional right to own and bear arms, and that is the Constitution, right? Some may not like it, but it is absolutely what the law says. But I think as a responsible parent and adult, and even me as the sheriff, because guns are a part of my life, like as a Marine, as a law enforcement professional, and I am a supporter of concealed carry. I mean, there's no doubt about that. People have their opinion, right? My opinion is I am a supporter of concealed carry. I am also mindful of my role as a parent to educate my kids not to touch firearms. That firearms are not toys. That you should check. If you see a gun, go get a responsible adult. If you know of somebody carrying a gun. So the messaging and the branding and policing when it comes to guns have not changed in decades. We've always said kids and guns don't match, that parents should be responsible and talk to their children not only about gun safety, but all types of safety, right? If you see needles on the ground, don't pick needles up. So when you have...
I guess what it gets frustrated is when you talk to somebody and they say, oh, I didn't know my gun was missing, or oh, I would think that the very first tenet of responsible gun ownership would be to know where your guns are.
Listen.
How could you not know where this thing is?
Well, amen. I mean, responsible gun ownership definitely know where your gun's at all times, right? Especially if you have children in the house, right? Like I would never leave my firearm unattended in my house with my kids there. Not only because it's a violation of law, but as a responsible adult and family member who loves my kids. Look, my kids, I feel, are doing just fine. But I just gave a stat that 25% of kids have seriously contemplated suicide. Additionally, I don't know what friends are going to be over the house. I just don't know, right? And I think that for kids, there's a fascination with things that they're prohibited from. And I think that we can break away from that. But it's so easy on this topic to sensationalize it.
Right. Well,
you know what I mean? It's like
one of the basic things that as parents we do is, we ask when our child is going to somebody else's house, let's say your child has a milk allergy, you know, you want to make sure that the other person knows that and knows how to, but I think that these days you have to ask that other family, you know, do you have guns and are they secure?
Well, I don't think these days, I think that we should have always done that.
True.
I think that,
True.
see, and what happens is, once again, we're sensationalizing things and we're starting to say, these days, no, in the 50s, you would want to know what's inside that house before you send your kids there.
Right.
There
Although I
was
don't
guns.
think it was that, I don't think people were that aware that there would be such availability of guns. And so that's why I say these days. So,
Yeah.
so we're looking at how we could move forward at making sure that we have laws that are sufficient. Do you feel that what we have now is sufficient, or
Well,
should
well,
we
let me say-
move it up somehow?
Well, let me say this, right? And this is going to be met with mixed emotions, and my team's probably, oh, don't say it. But look, I have to say, this is a statement of fact, right? You know, bad guys don't follow the law. Let me give you a comparison. We have this, it's 45 miles per hour on the street, right?
Right.
Speeders don't care what number we put on that sign. They're going to spill the tires and they're going to drive as fast as they can down the road. And they're not going to say, I only want to do 50 over the speed limit. They just don't follow the rules. They
But it
don't
doesn't
care.
negate the fact that we need them.
So we need them because what happens is the law-abiding people that follow the rules slow down all the bad people that are speeding. So people say, look, I really don't want to drive 45, but I can't get around all these other people who are following the rules. I mean, if you think about it, this is what happens, right? But so when we go to the legislative process, the people who follow the rules are who?
Are the law-abiding?
Law-abiding citizens, right? If I said, you know, whatever rule is, everyone in this room is going to abide by it, right? But if I go into other areas of the community, you think they're going to abide by it?
Maybe.
You think a drug dealer who has a dead body in the back of his car is going to say, you know what, I can't carry a gun anymore. It's just regulated. It is much more difficult than just one law. Like we've had a law for many years that you have to properly lock up your weapon.
Do we have questions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yes, Sheriff, I wanted to ask you about an article in the Sentinel in January of 2020, in which you were quoted as saying that if the then proposed Florida constitutional amendment that required registration of assault weapons was passed, that you would not comply with that requirement and enforce registration. And I wanted to ask you, is that still your position?
No, it's not. And I cleared my position up with the Sentinel, and that was one of those things that we're taking in contextual. My comments there were a law like that would take, it wasn't assault rifles, it was any rifle. So the spirit in which I said that was if your grandparents had passed down a firearm to you that has been in your closet for 2 or 3 generations, that if you failed to bring it in and register it, would make you a felon, that I would not proactively enforce that. I've since changed my position on that. I said I would absolutely enforce what the Constitution and the laws require. And again, I cleared that up with them 30 days after.
I'm not aware of that. I take you at your word.
Well, if you...
No, I'm not denying that you did. I'm just saying.
Yeah, if you dig in a little bit more, you'll see that I've clarified that. Some media sources are not good about publishing the clarifications, but rather the initial statements. And the fact is I cleared it up with them, and my position is I would enforce whatever the law is.
Thank you.
Ms. Mary?
In terms of programs for youth, and you talked about the support that your office has for educating youth. So are there any efforts to really educate youth about guns and gun safety? Because they're so, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is sexualized. That's not actually the word I want. But in films and movies and things like that, they're so glorified. And a lot of kids are just, they're fascinated by a gun. It's powerful. And there are a lot of families who don't take the responsibility to educate their children. So is there anything that law enforcement does
Oh, yeah.
to help in
So-
a preventive mode
Yeah.
educate children about that?
So, what's interesting is some of the services that we have provided have not gotten any attention, any light, but we've been providing these for 20 years. Like DARE and the GREAT program involved heavy curriculums on gun awareness, gun safety, but it's almost like what society has now made their priority is something that we've made priority decades ago. Like those curriculums in elementary school and middle school, and even the curriculum that we've created now, all have gun safety, awareness safety, but in addition to that, it's sexting, cyberbullying, it's all of these things that are going on now that kids potentially can be at harm from. It's just not guns. It's knives and mental health and other forms of suicide action. It's just all of these things. What is incredibly difficult is we can't replace people's parents. We can put as many people through a class as we can, but it's not until they go home. What is acceptable inside that house is typically what people will get away with. Like, we have some kids that are on campus and they have a gun in their backpack, which is incredibly alarming, right? There's not a person in this room that is not incredibly frightened about hearing that story, right? And we dig in, we find out what happened here. Is this where a kid took the parent's gun and put it in a backpack? Is it a gun that they found on the side of the road that was involved in a crime and didn't tell anyone about and put it in the backpack? Is it another kid brought it to school and handed it off to him? What is going on with this? And you can't not just solve it in one area. Education and awareness and prevention from the schools, from the policing authority, from the parents, from civic organizations. All of this has to work in harmony to address this. But to answer your question, it is a part of our even newest curriculum when it comes to education, awareness, and gun safety. So
Is that curriculum in the schools, or that's something?
well, we do it in the schools,
Okay.
and we do it through our crime prevention work as well. And if you go into that website of the sheriff's office where the gun locks and all of this, I don't know how more proactive, like do you know a more proactive organization other than one that's giving out free gun locks? But when I say that to you, how many hear that as a surprise?
I hear it as a surprise.
We've been doing it 25 years.
Yes. And I'd like to know if we could link that on our website so that parents could be aware of it as well. Is that something we could do?
I'm not the tech person here. my chief of staff says that we can do that, but
Okay.
Sheriff, we really appreciate it, but it is getting to be 1 o'clock, and
Okay.
I don't want to,
Just I have one question, and I think I saw somebody over there. We should probably not go over too much. We had a hand up over there, did we?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I thought you said a handout. First, I want to thank you for taking your time to do this, and I really appreciate the information on the drug prevention that we're doing and all the work that we're doing and the national record. One thing that I think I'd like to clarify is our interpretation of what community violence intervention and prevention is, because I think that we could really use it in the programs that you're talking about, and that's grassroots programs and prevention, and to do a lot of the work that you're talking about and actually trying to change the families. And we know in Orange County, so I know that we have a lot of really strong programs, credible messengers, vital interrupters, just mentoring programs, I hope, and I know Seminole County has a lot of those, and I think that would work tremendously well in the programs that you already have. So
yeah, we're there all, in the interest of time, I try to stay in the space that we have direct control over, but I'm on the executive board of directors for Boys and Girls Clubs. We've got Empower, we've got various programs that are actually in the school in addition to what we do. 501c3s, I'm co-chair of Project Opioid in Orlando, Victoria. There is great benefit to collaboration where you take these groups that have common interests and common practice, and then you share resources.
Absolutely.
So we're doing those same things here.
Well, and then the other question